Go, buddy.
Yeah,
All right. Well, if you're ready to get started, Greg, let's go ahead
I
and
am.
let's just jump right into today. Welcome everyone listening. Thanks for tuning in. Uh, Thanks for those of you who've been sharing episodes with friends. We do appreciate it, and those of you who've been reaching out.
Yes.
Today we are going to be talking about what is commonly referred to as duty to intervene. And I know you kind of probably talk about some of this, at least from a police perspective, but I'm going to try and take a more general approach of what we mean by duty to intervene. So um, I think first off, we start with by sort of defining what we mean by duty to intervene, and what we mean is sort of in one, well, it's what's typically mean in a police sense is that when an
Yeah.
officer sees another officer, a fellow officer doing something that may not fall in line with policies and procedures, whether it's illegal, immoral, and unethical, or just something that violates policy and procedure, you have a duty to do something or say something and intervene, even physically if necessary, right? And this is all kinds of different organizations have this, where we have an ethos, some values or core values where we
Right.
try to hold each other to a standard. And you want to create a lot of businesses want to create sort of a culture of that where you're allowed to express and tell your supervisor, hey, wait a minute, that's wrong, aren't we supposed to do it this way? Or your coworker. And this is something that obviously I mean, you teach your kids to do that, right? You teach your kids to stand up, for other kids who are being bullied, or to say when something's wrong, or not let one of your friends get. I mean, it's something you just want to have in life, but it's a lot more complicated
Much more
than people
complex
think.
than people make it. Yes.
And it's way more difficult than people realize. It's easy. I mean, just go on YouTube and see all these, big accounts that just bash people doing shit in videos. And it's like, well, why didn't they just do this? Or I would have done that. And once again, that's when I give the go F yourself. No, you wouldn't have. If you were in that position, you probably would have
Yeah,
done the same thing.
right. You can opine, but the,
Yeah.
the reality of the situation is going to be much
So,
different, I think.
so there's psychological and sociological and
Mhm.
physiological factors in all this, right? There's where you fit in. There's being a new person at an agency or company versus being there for a while. It's being highly experienced, being less experienced. There's a lot of factors that come into play on why people don't say things when they should. But my thing is, when you see some sort of egregious video where it's
Mhm.
obvious that someone's so far out of line that you would never do something like that. Okay, that's probably true, but it usually didn't start there. It usually started way before that, and we don't. It's hard. It's hard for me to say to you, Greg, when we're doing something, going, man, like Greg, like you sure we should have another round of bourbons here, or
Right,
whatever,
right.
or
Rein
whatever
it
the
in.
situation,
Right.
like it's
Well, you've never said that to me. So
no,
pick on because
that's the
everybody knows
that's the
it's
problem.
impossible.
That's the
Right.
problem with that one. But and especially when it's a loved one, a close friend, someone we
Yes,
work
of
with, to
course.
sit there and say
Somebody
something small.
respected, a leader.
And we always use the phrase, and it's a good one to know, is what you walk past is what you're willing to accept. And that's difficult to swallow, because even personally, like I mean, when I set something down and I don't put it away and it's sitting out there, after a matter of time, it just stays sitting out there for a while, and I don't ever put it away. You know what I mean? Like, because I see it and I go, oh, that
Yep.
really bothers me, but I keep walking past it. Like, I got to unpack that and I got to put that in the garage and that over here. Well, it's fine where it's at right now. Well, then like 3 months later, you're like, I really should get on top of that, right? But that's what happens. But in the situations where we're talking about now, people's behavior will continue to do that. Like they're going to continue to push boundaries or do things, if they're not held accountable. They're going to continue to escalate sometimes. And why we always try to do that early intervention strategy is because the sooner you intervene on something, the more likely they'll correct their behavior, or the less likely it's going to spiral out, or the less likely they're going to get in trouble for something, right? Me
Hmm.
just saying, hey, Greg, I don't know if we should go do that. Why don't we go this way? Is very different than waiting till we're in the middle of a situation and going, hey, Greg, what you're doing is now illegal. It's like, oh shit, that escalated quickly. If you'd said
Right.
something back there, maybe it wouldn't have escalated to this point. So that's kind
Yep.
of the general thing we want to talk about. And a lot to get into. So I'll let you start, because then I want to kind of pose some questions to you from your
Yeah.
experience in law enforcement.
Oh,
And
thanks.
well, and again, these are sort of
I could have
subjective
fielded
experience.
the bourbon questions, Brian, but
Well, These
Here
are
we go.
these are subjective experiences. Everyone has something where
Yeah.
they can look back and said, "Man, I probably should have said something back here," or you've been in that situation where it's sort of that almost that moral test, but it's not always obvious. Is the
No,
thing,
no.
right?
So
The obvious ones are
yeah,
easy, right? It's the
and then
ones
we
that
don't talk
aren't.
about them, right?
Yeah, it's
And we
that
don't read
gray
about them.
area. Yeah, that aren't so obvious that get difficult.
Well, let me try to show the magnitude of the problem. I'll give you two parallels, okay? So the first one, I'll depose you. The term ROE means something to you. It's
Yeah,
meaningful in some way. Can
Ru
you tell me what those letters stand for?
rules of engagement.
Okay, and those rules are rigid standards of use of force. Is that true?
Yes. It's a
Yes.
standard of how you're supposed to apply it. They can change based on the
Well,
situation,
no, no,
but
no.
yeah,
Asked,
yeah.
asked and answered. So
Sorry, you
yes,
said
they are
rigid, but
rigid.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's okay, but they are a rigid standard, right? Now, you said it, and I'll go there, Your Honor, but with this witness, they do change from engagement to engagement, and from district to district, and from
yes,
mission to mission.
absolutely.
Okay, give me an example of how one might view an ROE one day and then have somebody come in and brief you on a change. How might that rule of engagement change from one venue to the next?
Well, you like you just said, you're going to get some sort of brief or some sort of explanation of why it changed or what particular manner it changed. So maybe
Okay.
it was, hey, you are no longer allowed to fire any type of warning shot. Where
Okay.
before it was, hey, this is a checkpoint. You are allowed to, if they don't stop at this point,
Yep.
you can fire a round either in front of or at the hood of the vehicle, which warning shots are the dumbest thing ever. Don't ever do them. But,
Right.
but,
That can kick off a firefight like
yeah.
you wouldn't believe, by the way.
Yeah,
Right.
you're allowed certain things, and then that could change. You can say, hey, we're no longer doing that. That's no longer the risk of something going wrong. There is no longer worth the benefit of doing that. So
Okay.
we're not going to do that anymore. Or it changes to, hey, absolutely no one comes past this point. Not only
Yes.
is a warning shot, but you are allowed to engage because the threat level of the situation has completely changed. But
Now,
like you said, it's brief.
have you, in your experience as a subject matter expert, ever, and Your Honor, I would swear him in as a subject matter expert before I ask this to you guys,
And I would
but
never testify. I would invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
exactly. But to answer this question on podcast, which is a lesser standard, have you ever received ever a rule of engagement that said you cannot fire back upon somebody unless you're fired upon? So they have to
Yeah,
initiate the
yes,
action.
yes. That's something that's not uncommon even. Yeah.
So it's would it be a stretch to say that that's a common thing?
Yes.
Okay. So the
I'm
idea
sorry. No,
is
it wouldn't be a
it's
stretch.
not a
It's
stretch,
not a stretch. Yeah.
but the idea is in all the times you've gone into combat zones, you've received a briefing on a rule of engagement. It
Yes.
was a rigid standard. It laid out all of the situations that they anticipated that you would get into. And there were extremes where you could shoot at anybody at any time in any situation. There were extremes that went the other way, and I'm taking a liberal license here, that
Yeah.
said you can't shoot until you were shot upon. The difference between a rule of engagement and the law is the law can't change as quickly as a rule of engagement.
Right.
So our laws and our amendments in the Constitution takes an awfully long time to change. So what we've done is we've built in arbiters of justice that look at your actions at that time and at that place, putting themselves in your shoes and saying, what is the reasonable standard? Now I'll go back to you with an ROE. If you violated an ROE, you would be arrested or brought up on charges, yet they wouldn't convict you of anything unless they did what? Unless they conducted an investigation.
Investigation.
And
Right.
you could say, in this instance, I had to violate the rule of engagement.
Based
Okay.
on the
Based
totality
on
of
the
the
exactly.
circumstances of
So
what
so
that specific situation was. Right.
so Brian, a long way around the tent, but what I'm trying to say is, folks, before you go and say this is egregious, you got to take a look at the big picture. So why do we then have these videos? So Brian is going to set up in the podcast notes a number of different scenarios, and you'll get to watch the videos. Well, the videos you're going to watch are the most outlandish, the most out of control videos you've ever seen. I would say that use of force, a force encounter, and a duty to intervene probably comes up thousands of times a day, maybe 100,000 times a day, and you never ever hear about it. Why? Because most of them are interactions that are lower scale. Hey, Tommy, don't double dip with your nacho chip into the sauce. Okay, Billy, don't go back in there and take the whiteout. I don't even know if they use whiteout anymore. And the typewriter ribbons, that's for company use only. You can't take them home. Those type of situations happen outside ex parte law enforcement, out of the courts, out of the corrections all the time. You do it with your kids, don't you? When your kid colors outside the line, you bring them back in.
Yep.
So almost every rule of engagement, almost every duty to intervene, those types of situations happen in society and are straightened out by the people that are closest. So there's 2-point standard that I always put to something if it's going to fail. And I sent you this in a text about something different just a couple of days ago. The 2 things that I see failing all the time are leadership and training. Why do I say that? Because what happens is we want these things to be a standard, but if you're not briefing it and not rehearsing it and not training to a standard, Brian, it's impossible to expect and almost as impossible to enforce, right?
That's what we see with it. This is one of those things where it's like, yeah, we have a policy for that, right? Okay, and this is what our policy is, and everyone read it and signed it. Okay, great. You know the policy.
I can show you your signature.
No, you fucking don't. That doesn't. It's those discussions of what would that look like? How? Not just because otherwise it's let's well, hey, let's just go do your online duty to intervene training. There you go.
That's it.
When in this situation, you must take into account all of the it's that fucking bullshit that everyone clicks through anyway. And so, and this is one of those things that really can be done in those discussions to say, okay, given this set of circumstances, if this were to occur, what would you do? How would you handle it? But then show me, explain to me what you would say to the person who is doing that in the moment. Because now that gives me some file folders, that gives me some way to do it. Because this is my, I guess I kind of posed to you sort of my first general question, and you can get to it however you want to get to it. But a lot of people will look at these different situations and say, oh, that's, moral cowardice. You have to stand up for what's right. Or they'll do that. Well, they kind of fall into peer pressure, and that can happen. And my sort of question on this is based on sort of your law enforcement experience, because that kind of generally where we're taking this, but this works anywhere. Is that the case, or sometimes is it the lack of that person's ability to really articulate the situation that they're in? Meaning
that's a great point, Brian.
They know, yes, I read the policy. This kind of seems like I'm feeling as if this is outside of this. Something doesn't feel right. I don't like this. But a lot of times I don't know how to take that policy that I just signed and then apply that in some novel situation, because that's the whole key.
That's called
the
learning,
whole
by the way.
That's training and education, right?
Exactly.
But we do that, and we pass that off as like, we get that, we understand that. So meaning, do you see that? Because
I love the
it's
question.
easy to fall into peer pressure. Yes, you can create a culture of fucking lawlessness. You've told stories where you're in morning roll call and feds come in and start arresting people out of there.
The guy sitting next to you and takes the file cabinet.
So
honest to God, it happened many times. Yeah.
So
look, let's do this. Let's talk about socialization and how this can work, because I don't want everybody thinking that it's not going to get better, because it's going to get better. But we have to have a standard
for survival.
So absolutely. So I remember as a little kid, my earliest memories traveling around with my old man, and my old man would see somebody that was broken down, and my old man would pull over. And I would go, Dad, what are we doing? I'm afraid. I don't know these people. I don't understand why you're pulling over to help them. And he would tell me, we're a member of the Good Sam Club. And it was a little cartoon figure with a halo, and it stood for Good Samaritan. And that meant that when you see somebody that needed help, you pulled over and you helped them. And he told me, I have a duty as a member of this club. I have an obligation to help my fellow man. And I was like, oh my God. My dad taught me most of my things that I relate now at the end of his fist, right?
Yeah,
but this was one of the times that he didn't beat me. And I was like, wow, I really like this guy, that, the pugilist, that drunken man that beats me. But the idea, Brian, is that if that was part of the culture during the 60s, when other things were happening, where anti-establishment and hippie and I'm fighting this, then we know that even during arduous times that, common sense can prevail. So what did that mean to me? Well, that meant that there is a standard that's out there. And when you look at Good Sam, the Good Samaritan, I want you to take a look at the other end of the spectrum. You and I were involved in something, and I have to non-attribute myself, folks, because I don't want to insult somebody, but we were involved in something that had to do with military academies at some level. And the idea was that when we were going through to conduct our assessment of what the seams and gaps
Yeah.
are that they needed the training in, the idea is that we had people come up to us hand over fist and say, the biggest problem here is number one, honor code
Honor code
violations,
violations.
and number two, that the values had sunk so low that other people were failing to report blatant honor code violations that occurred right in front of them.
Or the found the cheating on the honor code part of the test.
Yes,
That
which
was
was
not
actually
making that up.
which was actually the second punch. So we got hit with the left and then got hit with the he when they came and said, yeah, the number one thing they cheated on was the honor code and values test. So what does that mean? Does that mean that we've spun wildly out of control? Now, what that means is that sometimes we value the letter of the law, and sometimes we discuss that at on-duty roll call, and sometimes we discuss it over dinner with our kids, and we haven't been doing that in a while. And that form of leadership in our society has waned. And therefore, if I don't get trained on it, dad taking a knee or mom taking a knee or whoever your significant caregiver is taking a knee and say, no, Timmy, Judy, whatever you want to associate with, this isn't how we handle that. And I'll bring up a temper tantrum, Brian. Temper tantrums are important to me. Temper tantrums are when any kid lets out a strong outburst of emotion because they're not able yet because of timing in their brain and emotions and maturity to express themselves in a way that we deem, as the rest of society, socially acceptable. So if you see that kid do the temper tantrum, the first ring of defense is the parental unit or caregiver to say, no, Tommy, that doesn't go. But then the society around it going, oh my gosh, look at this kid. And Billy, you better never act like that. Do you understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
these ripples start going out, and those ripples are what create the societal impact that temper tantrums have. And that's why we don't have them as adults, because we have to modify that behavior. But if we don't know leadership, somebody stepping in, there's a duty to intervene, isn't there? Right? I mean, I step into my kid and go, no, Billy, straighten up right now, and grab him by the collar, or however we do it without violence these days, right? But the idea is if we don't have those steps, Brian, observe the tantrum, say this is not socially acceptable, this is the right
No,
behavior, then we haven't learned a thing. Yeah.
no, that and that's a good point. Actually, it reminds me of a story when the insurgent was playing around with a bunch of kids at a playground one time years ago, and one kid was just kind of like overreacting and screaming like bloody
Yep.
murder. I mean, like screaming, and like I had to walk in there and step in, and I told her, and I stopped them all from playing, but obviously I was just talking to her. I'm not gonna yell at someone else's kid, especially
Yep.
right there. You know what I mean? But I was like, hey, you see how that kid is screaming like that? That is absolutely unacceptable. You cannot ever do that.
Yep.
The only reason if I hear something like that, it's because something has gone seriously wrong and someone's trying to hurt you. Because if I keep
Which
hearing
is
that,
a societal
yes,
trigger for all of
because
us. Yes.
and
Warriors
you could
cried
tell
wolf.
like you could tell all the other parents, like I was saying it loud enough for them to hear
Yep.
it. Then they kind of keyed in, were like, wow, they didn't even think of that. I was like, yeah, exactly. Because if you keep screaming like that, I'm not going to notice it anymore, and that's going to be the time
Tune it
that
out.
the kids are going to get snatched up. But it's those moments. There's so much into it. Yet we talk about values and we talk about what that means. They can mean different things to different people. Like you could
Yep.
have your own interpretation of events, but you can boil all of them down into some very basic tenets. And what the problem is, we don't kind of include some of that in what we're doing. Because we're so focused on just this little mini thing that we're focusing on. Well, this is how they use the force in this, and that went wrong. They shouldn't have done that. They're a bad person because remember, it's not their training, right? The training department's not going to get fired. It's just
Hey,
that
we
that
blew it,
person.
right? You're
Yeah,
never gonna
yeah,
have them
yeah.
step up.
No, no,
Hey,
no.
we
So,
fucked that one
but
up.
what it is, and we just kind of go after that individual.
Yes.
And meanwhile, that individual was like, you could play the video back for them, and some of the times they won't even recognize themselves doing that. Meaning,
Yep.
they won't even know in the moment that they're out of line because you don't in those situations, right?
Yep.
I've had to have my wife step in with stuff that I was doing where I was getting heated in situations where, yeah, I the person was in the wrong
Yes.
clearly, right? But I didn't need to get that upset over it, and I've had to have her go, hey, like, babe, where are you going with this? Like absolutely not. And I'm like, oh shit, yeah, you're right. I'm getting kind of heated right now. I'm gonna go ahead and take a step back. And
Yep.
having that in those moments, that's when it's difficult. But if you don't practice and kind of rehearse that or train for that, you're not going to. Because I have to tell her, even with conversations we have out, she has to be like, hey, tone it down. Like they're not those jokes or comments are out of line in this situation because I don't understand the social cues of where I'm at, right?
Exactly.
So it's just
Oh,
like,
you
oh,
still
okay.
don't. And
No,
that's
I
so,
don't.
but that's hugely important. But the thing is, Brian, that you don't have a teardrop tattoo face.
My
Do you
intent
get what
is
I'm
not.
trying to
Yeah, yeah,
say?
yeah.
And you didn't just get released from prison and go, wow, I really screwed that up. You're
Yeah,
learning,
yeah,
take 40 years,
yeah.
but,
It is.
you're learning a little at a time. And this gets back to the core of the issue of the question that you
Yeah,
originally asked me. The idea is, if I was at on duty roll call tomorrow with your agency folks, the very first thing I would do is take a knee and tell everybody your peace cannot be breached. You're a law enforcement professional, and the breach of peace and disorderly conduct and all those things that you see around you aren't personal attacks on you, even if the person makes it a personal attack on you. And your job is to be the moral conscience of the rest of the unit and world. And if you can't do that without emotion, without physically getting involved, are there times that you have to use force? Yes. What should that force be? It should be the force reasonable for the situation to affect the means of whatever it is that you're doing. Now, that means maybe to restore order for the rest of society, not that you personally have been maligned. Okay. That doesn't mean that you can't defend yourself. That doesn't give a person the right to punch you and attack you and do other things. But these preliminary strikes that we're seeing, and that's, Brian, what we're seeing is we're seeing a preliminary strike where anger raises to the
right.
level of rage in such fast time, gift to time distance, folks, that a person lashes out and then goes, holy crap, what did I just do? Right? So those things, look, anger issues don't get cured, but anger can get better. And anger serves a valid purpose because it sends signals, electrochemical signals. I just put those words together somehow in my brain to other people that, look, you're getting angry. Why would that be important? Because you're important to me as a social thermometer. So I understand that either my behavior is out of control, your behavior is out of control, or whatever is going on right now isn't going to help the tribe. And we don't want to waste calories, right, on anything that's not survival oriented. So when somebody acts up in a bar and you get pissed and your significant other says, no, just let it go, and you're getting angry and you want to step up and say something, that's society, Brian. That's
Yeah,
how it's supposed to work. You're
yeah.
supposed to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to let that, hey, tone it down.
So
Stop dropping
and
the F
and
bombs at church or
and
whatever it is. You're
you're
supposed to intervene.
well, no, that and this is the point of why these things occur and why you have to talk about them. It is a sociological imperative for you to keep people in line. Meaning, me
Yes.
as a human being, I'm wired that way so that we're all moving in the same direction for the purposes of survival. Because if you get too far out of line, you may get the whole tribe killed.
Yep.
It's not like, because you said it's about me and I could get offended. Yes, but it's not just about you. It's about everything. It's about what we represent as a society as a
Exactly.
whole. So we sort of undermine these situations by not, elevating them to this almost the seriousness. Like we oversimplified it. It's like, oh well, they just said this. Don't take it personally. It's like, oh, okay, you're glossing over, like, I don't know,
Right.
uh, hundreds of thousands of or millions of years
Yep.
of evolution, but just for
Yep.
humans themselves, a few 100,000 years of how we've been operating. And so I think we
There are
but
no shortcuts to
there's
this.
no
We are
shortcuts, but
not
we don't
exactly.
take it as seriously as we take other things because we don't realize the importance of it, because it's
So
something that's seemingly intuitive that we have on board, but we don't, if we don't articulate it clearly
yeah.
amongst a common set of values where we can all point to the sign and say, yes, these are the things. Greg, you define it. Okay, good. Brian, you define it. Okay,
Yep.
Bill, you define it. Got it. This is what it means, and this is how we carry that forward. These are the most important things. It's like when we worked with the
It
military.
is.
Remember, we're doing insider threat program, and then you had the one leader who was like, yeah, I'll tell you what keeps me up at night. It's sexual assault on this base. It's like, wait a minute,
Right.
we're in the middle of a combat zone, and
Yep.
you're not even talking about what's going on out there, what's worried, and that's because it's an insider threat. That's the most important part. Well, how can that happen? How could that happen in an organization with literally codified values, ethics, morals,
Exactly.
and that it all rests upon? Because that's the foundational element for all of these different situations. It's what societally do we want? What does the law say? How did the laws get there? Well,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
collection of our values and beliefs over time, right? That have been codified. So they're pretty important, right?
So
And then
let's
what
throw this. You are on something that we need to define further. So there's two angles here, Brian. First angle is this. You have a mental Rolodex. For you guys that are and ladies that are listening that have no idea what I'm talking about, look it up. It's a great search.
oh,
But a Rolodex
Rolodex?
was a place that you kept
Yeah.
business cards and you
Phone
turned them
numbers and yeah.
and had phone numbers and contact information in the old days when we had rotary phones and stuff. And so it's a big wheel that looks like a fan, and each one of the little things was alphabetized, so you could go to A, B, C, D, E, obviously, and find Brian Marin under M or B, and then or A as Arcadia. And when you open it up, there was all this information. Well, your brain is very similar to that.
Yeah.
We store information in short term and in long term in different corticals of the brain, different areas of the brain, so that some are scent triggered, then brought forward to, be visually triggered, or some are visually triggered, and then they bring together a number of file folders so your brain can choose between the 4 or 5 that are, and these happen in nanoseconds, and they happen just as fast, faster than you can actually think of them. And the idea is so that you don't drop on a white card. The idea is that you're always coming up with a potential solution to a new or novel external arousal that's close to something you've encountered. Because the problem is if it's not close to what you've encountered, you end up on that white card and everything is a gamble.
Right,
Roll the dice. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
which is fine when I'm here at work reading an
Yep.
email and I don't know the answer.
Yep.
But that's not fine
But a
in a
little different in a
chaotic.
backyard
Yeah,
at night when a guy is pulling
exactly.
a
That
thing that
and
might be a cell phone or a gun.
that's the
You
point.
know?
There is no time to think, and you don't. So your brain's
Exactly.
jamming the
That's
information
why.
in your head, and so like you said, you come up blank, and
Exactly.
if there's nothing there, you've got no response, or it'll fall to some primitive level.
Right.
Well, it'll fall to muscle memory, but we can train for things what people call
Right.
muscle memory, which apparently, and now I guess people be like, well, I don't know, you're not supposed to use that term anymore. Like, well, your muscle doesn't actually have memory. And I'm like, wait a minute, you thought this whole time that when
Oh
someone
my
said
God.
muscle
That
memory
you
meant they had
right.
actual memory in your muscle? No, that, that's a
So
neurological pathway in your
this
brain.
just
But it
shows
just
how
so
stupid
anyway,
training
yeah,
can be,
yeah.
Brian.
So
But
people get dumb.
let's get to that.
But what I'm
So
saying is you can
yes.
build a response and build in repetition that way. But here you have underlying muscle memory or hardwired,
So
but beneath that will overtake it if you don't have some pre-planned response, and you can't
right.
pre-plan every response to every
No,
situation.
but you don't
You
need
don't
to.
need to.
What you
Yeah,
do is you have to have channels. You have to have lanes in your brain where your brain will go, this isn't exactly the same thing, but it's cognitively close enough. Hence, let's give a couple of examples. So one example, Chantel is a genius. He sent it to us. It'll be in the notes. Great article. The number one thing that causes death in the airline industry is when aviation enthusiasts that fly all the time get into a stall and then fail to correct the stall. So everybody that's out there that's listening that can't see me, I just want you to take your hand and hold your hand sort of flat with your palm down out in front of you. Now, a stall occurs when your hand, now increase the angle at the front of your fingers so they're pointing towards the ceiling at like 35, 38 degrees. When you're going up, okay, all of a sudden you may have an engine stall. So the best way to correct the stall is to drop that nose, now point your fingers down towards the floor, and that will increase your thrust, your lift, and you'll get your engine back on and you'll save yourself. The problem is that without on-duty roll call training to remind you of this, hint, 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 what happens is to save yourself, intuitively you think, I want to pull back on the yoke.
because
Why?
I don't want to
Because the
fall towards
ground's
the
below
ground.
me. I don't
Yeah,
want to fall. I'm going down, Brian. And what happens is that's exactly the wrong thing to do. And now you're going to be in a flat spin or some other emergency, and you're going to die. So to your point about the muscle memory fight, which we're not going to get into,
yeah.
folks, but if you
No
want to,
thanks.
we're ready. The idea is that I've said it 1,000 times in every training venue. You can't go out there and make something look like a gun and paint it a different color, but put it in a holster on your gun belt
Yeah,
and then say, hey, listen, this is the real gun. This is the taser. because what you do, and I don't care who you are, come challenge me with this one. I'd love to have you on the show. The idea is that you've done your gun so many times that it becomes what you define as muscle memory. But then when you go to your less than lethal, which is also a type of gun, and there's another article that Brian will put up there where the young female who is now traumatized beyond,
Yeah.
less traumatized than the guy she killed, of course. But the idea was that her training kicked in, Brian, and she reached for the thing in her brain that said taser, but that her hand had done 1,000 times more,
Yep.
and she shot a guy. So you can't look, if you're a leader and you're a trainer and you don't every single day come out of your office and talk to your employees, you're doing them a disservice. You have to model the behavior you expect to create the file folder for the desired outcome. That's leadership. Then you have to offer the training for that. Hey, one day you're going to be sitting there and a guy in a wheelchair with a folding pocket knife is
Yeah.
going to be slowly moving away, Tucson, from shoplifting. And you're going to come upon that empty file folder, but some part of your intuition is going to say, I have to stop this guy somehow. And you're going to pull a gun and you're going to shoot him. And you're going to say, well, it's justified because he could have done this or that. Kiss my ass, it's justified. The idea is that when we get afraid, we become little children. We go back to the tantrum. And what did I tell you about the tantrum? Is we weren't able to express our behavior in a socially acceptable way because we were on a
Well,
blank file folder.
and
Nobody modeled the
that's
behavior
that that
they expected from me, Brian.
that's what it goes back to, right? In that situation is that, if I come up with nothing, okay, I've never seen this before, and I don't know how to
Yep,
think my way through a situation. Yeah, again, fear comes in. Uncertainty will lead to fear, and then fear causes us to make bad decisions. And you can get
exactly.
angry, you can go turn into rage. But that
Yep,
unknown right there of not being able to think through the situation because I'm just relying on some sort of muscle memory or some response to
yep,
something some conditioned response to every situation. If I mean
yep,
that's what you're relying on, that's how these things occur. That's how you get so
you're
wildly out of
exactly
control.
right.
It's like you're not thinking through. You're literally not thinking at all. You're just responding. And if you hit that blank file folder, you hit come up with nothing. You get that Jeopardy theme, and then your brain goes, "I don't like this. I don't like this one bit."
And here comes the fist.
Here,
Here
yep,
comes the boots. Hey,
yep.
now, so let's talk about that. One of the capers that you've got on there is a female that's restrained that gets hit. One of the things that will be in the notes, folks, is Port Huron copper that strikes out at a person that's being verbally abusive and drunk, but hasn't put up his dukes or done anything that would show a reasonable person that he's about to fight. You right now have a mental file folder that anger goes to rage. You don't need that. Rage comes upon you. Rage is
So quick.
an emotion that has no purpose in present day society, but it was there as part of our survival instincts. And anger was a message. Anger's a form of communication. Okay, so what you have to understand is that rage is no rage controls the situation through a outburst of uncontrolled violence right now because my brain didn't have another solution available. So what happens is you don't need to have anger to get to rage, and you have to watch the people around you because when it strikes, it'll lash out so quick it'll surprise you. Now, if you're talking about the training for duty to intervene, I'd love to see the type of training for that that doesn't include an emotional pin register of your folks that you're working with, because you have to get used to your folks. Look, if they're angry, you can tell them, hey, calm down, Joe. But when Josephine isn't angry and all of a sudden you see the situation starting to go up, you need to take a knee or take a step back, give yourself the gift of time and distance, and look at your team and go, look, one of us is about to have an uncontrolled outburst of rage and choke this person or spray them or slap them or do something stupid. So we have to remember that our peace cannot be breached. We'll be fine. We're going to get through this. Now, Brian, I am not saying about a person that's armed with a gun and not following commands and all that other stuff. I'm saying a drunk person is saying, I'll kick your ass. And the next thing we know, we've punched them. They're down and we're hobbling on the ground. And we don't understand how we got there. And then all the cops that are standing around that couldn't believe that it just occurred, we're going, hey, let's charge every one of those for failing to
Yeah.
intervene. You can't get there from here. You have to train it. It's got to be a part of your culture, and it's got to come. Your boss has to step in every day. You're going, hey, I'm chief of police. You assume I'm going to show up on midnights and talk to the team. If you don't, you're never going to be able to control those things that are going to occur without your view and your leadership.
Yeah, and again, these are kind of sort of these are obvious examples, right? When you
Yeah.
see it of where something could have, but or something should have been done prior to that, but or someone should have stepped in or should have said something. And there's there's plenty of those examples, but it gets more complicated when it's something smaller. It's our friend, it's someone we work with,
Yes.
it's something simple as, they're you're filling up the rental car that's paid for by the company you work for and the gas card that they give you, and then you're putting some drinks and some food on that card too with it. And it's
Yep.
like, well, okay, well, did they say that was okay? It's like, if not, then you can't do that. And it's like that person's the same, it's like, oh, well, what's the
Yeah.
big deal? It's a couple bucks that, hey, they're not gonna even notice because it's all going to the same charge. It's like, yeah, but if you're willing to treat someone else's
What else
money
are you
or
willing to do?
property, what else are you willing to do?
I
And
absolutely
and
agree.
and that's, we don't think of it that way in those moments. We go, well, that's a different standard. It's like, no, it's the same
It,
standard.
it is. So,
Whether you're, you're just, grifting off some of the old folks in your neighborhood, taking their money, or
yep.
you're Bernie Madoff taking billions of dollars from people. It's fraud. I mean, the
It
dollar
is.
amount doesn't matter in the sense that of what you did, but we don't look at
Right.
it that we judge them all differently. And if you, because we don't want to put ourselves in something, well, maybe I shouldn't have done this, or maybe I took too much here, maybe I didn't do that. And that's the thing. It's like those are the little things that do matter. That's what
Our,
builds into these
exactly.
cases.
Exactly, and that's how you build a culture. So
Yeah.
so our forefathers and folks, don't bang me with father and mother and all this other stuff. I get it all, but just to make sure that it's an efficient form of speech, our forefathers sat down and said, "What are the values that are important to us that we want to protect? This is what you, as the owner of your business, have to do to your personnel." So they said, well, we have to have a Fourth Amendment. And everybody goes, we already got three. Geez, how many are there going to be, right?
Yeah.
And they sat down and they said, hey, we have to define reasonableness. And they said, why? Well, because all of our decisions are predicated on what a reasonable person would do in the same situation. So, Brian, I would go to my company and I would say, hey, folks, this is your gas credit card. Do you understand that you can't buy chips or Coke or any of those other things? Because everybody in the company goes, yeah, well, we understand that. Yeah, well, you know what? Tammy didn't. And Tammy's no longer with us
Yeah.
because she did those things. Oh, okay. So Tammy's behavior was unreasonable given the circumstances. We're right back to our ROE comment. So
Right.
what's the fourth say? The fourth says that, hey, we're going to protect you from any unreasonable search or seizure by the government. That's a hugely important standard, Brian. So it's a guarantee against all searches and seizures that are unreasonable. There's our standard again. So now we've created a standard, and you go, okay, well then why do cops get a buy? Well, because they put in there that, look, you have to be able to have a limited intrusion because you think that that person is up to no good. So they say, look, here's the thing. It's okay to have a limited intrusion as long as it's reasonable. So a copper can affect a traffic stop or go up and contact you on the street. And the second part of the standard is, look, public safety takes precedence because we want our society, our tribe to flourish. So we're going to allow certain things, warrant search, a warrant arrest, or an unwarranted search or an arrest in very extreme circumstances. So the idea of a duty to intervene is incumbent upon the Fourth Amendment. So you're exercising excessive force whenever you don't stop a copper from slapping the person that you stopped because they felt their peace was breached or they were insulted. But Brian, without the leadership component telling you that and reminding you of that
It-
and having it as a part of your training, it's going to get lost in the sauce because of familiarity. Familiarity breeds
right. Breeds
contempt,
contempt. Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah.
right.
And
And
no, no.
familiarity also makes things seem okay for
Well,
Bill and Tad and
yeah.
Joan to do, but not okay for you and I. And that's not, it's wrong. It's got to be reasonable for everybody.
Change blindness, adaptation takes over,
Yes.
and you don't notice it at all. And no, but you bring up a really good point there, because because we go into these seemingly gray areas where people are like, well, it kind of depends on the context and this. It's like, okay, but and how you were raised and what your values are, and or it might be different. No. So what you did right there is perfect, and
Yep.
is especially if it's a law enforcement example, tie it right back to the Fourth Amendment because that's codified. There's
Why
case
not?
law to support it. There's left and right lateral limits that have gone that the Supreme Court has come out with different cases saying yes, this applies, no, it doesn't here, yes, it does here, over and over again, right? Throughout history. So you have everything there to already rely on. If you tie it back to the law, it actually, and this kind of gets back to the point that I was talking about earlier when I kind of posed the question to you is that sometimes people get in these situations because they don't know how to articulate what they saw that was wrong. Or or
Right?
or and literally, if I don't know the words to describe how my supervisor, stepped over the line, because like you said, maybe that supervisor didn't even really realize at that point where they were at. You know what I'm saying? Maybe didn't they
Yeah, of
realize they
course.
had gone in that time? Can everyone fall into that? Of course, especially if you've never been called on it before in the past or never seen what right looks like or been told how to articulate this stuff. So using a simple Fourth Amendment example, right, of
Yep.
saying, well, hang on here. We're actually going outside the purview of what we're allowed to do in this given situation,
Yep.
makes it clear so it's not a value judgment, right? Because if I try to, you're going to get offended if I say, well, that doesn't align with my values, and and you're going to go, wait, you saying like my dad didn't teach me, he taught me how to do this and he showed me this and I went to this place, and it becomes almost this, we get a lot of ego involved, it becomes like but if I have some other way to just describe it, it makes it
Exactly.
clear, it makes it much more clear, and then it becomes in the eyes of the law, which is even more
So so
applicable.
so if you were going to conduct training at on-duty roll call, and it only takes a couple of minutes, you
Yep.
say, look, you're going to be out there and you're going to see somebody suspicious, and that person is going to heighten your awareness of them based on the baseline for their emotions and their activities and their behavior, and you're going to want to stop them. Now, remember, you have the right to make a reasonable inquiry and confirm or dispel those suspicions that you have. And that's under Minnesota versus Dickerson. So we're going to bring up the 93 case law and we're going to talk about it for 2 minutes. Or the one that most people are familiar with, more familiar, Terry versus Ohio.
Oh yeah.
Terry
Yeah.
stop, and you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, okay, so what we just did is in 4 minutes before roll call, we gave a couple examples. We can even act it out with Joan and Bill, who are going to get up and say, hey, sir, I need to speak with you for a minute. I'm so and so. Okay, we can do that. Now, I'll tell you another one I would do New Jersey versus TLO. Okay. So look, schools, your kid, when they go to school, virtually has no protection under the
Yeah.
Fourth Amendment
Right.
because schools don't need a warrant. Okay.
Yeah.
All they need is the reasonable
It's
standard. It's got to be reasonable under the circumstances of that search at that time. And guess what? TLO says we don't have to do that in New Jersey versus TLO, folks. Says that we don't have to do that. You don't have the protection, just like because a motor vehicle is inherently mobile. Therefore, you've got a lot less protections. Look, if we did this in civics class in school and taught the kids the meaning of what they have and what they can protect, they wouldn't resist it when they were on the ground or run or flee. And if we taught cops that at on duty roll call and reinforced it every day, Brian. So what we're saying is leadership in schools teaching our next generation, parents at home teaching our next generation, on duty roll call, those are all
I
chances for
and
leadership and training in limited circumstances to give you a model for your behavior. And all I'm saying is that's a file folder. That becomes one of those files on your Rolodex.
and I think those discussions and everything you brought up is actually it's more, I those are more important than policy and procedure. And what I
Oh,
mean
I
by that,
agree. I would
because
agree.
one, policy and procedure changes. Those things don't change, meaning the law is what it's been since they got to the Fourth Amendment. You know what I mean? So
Spot on.
I mean, you can use that as a framework going forward because you can rely on that no matter the circumstances. A policy or procedure is going to change. Tactics, techniques, and procedures, as I always see people talking about this, and we're going to
Yep.
create new tactics for this. And it's like, okay, and then next month you're going to do something else, and then next year it's going to be something different. And then 5 years from now, you're going to look back at this and say that was stupid. Like you look back at tactics 10, 20 years ago and say, God, those are dumb. I can't believe we did this. But you think you're doing things right now. All right, got it. Like,
Yep.
what do you think
Yep.
they thought at that time too? So maybe less emphasis on that.
Plato.
Yeah.
Plato said you had a duty to intervene.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm
Well,
trying to say? Nietzsche did. So
and
it's been around
the
forever.
other part of this too is whether yeah, sure, whether it's a police agency or any organization or company, You can control this. This is behavior, and these are things that you can control, right? There's
Absolutely.
there's shit that's going to happen out there that is outside of your span of control. There's going to be things that are played out in the media or social changes or things people say. Great, let them do it, right? But these are things you can control, because I always say any group, like we talk about, groups and how to become successful. We talk about leadership and culture and all this. We define a little bit more in terms of human performance and
Yep.
behavior and how that fits in overall. But, organizations that police their own really well, they do really well, right?
Yes.
When they hold everyone to that standard, those are the organizations that they don't come into these conflicts. They don't have those.
Exactly.
And when they do, right, if they do, right, it becomes clear that that's not part of their culture, and it's more understood by the
And
public
that
in general.
person sticks out like a sore thumb amongst
Yeah.
their peers, and their peers will turn on them and say that's not acceptable. I agree with you. And that's we should endeavor to get back to a society where, listen, I understand your opinion counts, but the whole reason we formed a democracy is that other people are going to champion that as well. So you can't say, "Well, I disagree with the law." Well, of course you can say anything
Well,
you want,
you
but
can, but
but the idea is that what keeps us all paddling in the right direction is the fact that you will understand that some things are meant for all of us, and you have to do that, Brian. You have to have the temerity. You have to have the leadership ability to go into your folks and go, hey, today's another day. I know it's a rough day. Yeah, I'll give you an example of that. The right now the Trump and the 37 counts and this and that. It's got a lot of people thinking, look, today I got up, I had a cup of coffee, the sun was up, things are generally going to be okay. It's not unbridled hedonism. This is not the apocalypse. We still have time
yeah.
to rein things in, folks. Stop thinking
Well,
everything is the end of the world, right?
you brought up Plato, and if
Yeah,
people go back and read what Plato was saying about his society and his culture then, and it's going to look exactly what you see play out
precisely.
today on the news, on social media. The people are saying the
Same
exact same
arguments,
things.
same
So
arguments, same argument against the government, same
so
argument
I
against the
I I
leaders,
don't I don't know if
right?
how correct those things are, because they didn't play out for him, right? I mean, what
I get it.
generation hasn't said the next generation is the softest, weakest, dumbest, right? It's like,
Exactly. But
well,
everybody says
yeah,
that.
right. Well, and they're not going to take responsibility, even though they're the ones that raised that generation. But yeah, oh yeah, it's not my
Good
fault
point.
that my kid's
Muscle
my
memory.
kid's a punk. Like, oh yeah, it is
Yeah.
actually.
Oh
But
yeah.
but but to go back to that, having those discussions about that and how that plays out, super simple to do. I mean, that's the whole point of these,
Yes.
is those are because you create sort of those thinking points, so you don't end up on that blank, right, file folder, that
That's
blank
all we
Rolodex.
care about in this podcast is that you understand that when it spins, it's going to come up. And if it comes up with words and photos and ideas and all that stuff, you'll generally be fine because that means that
Yeah,
you've had the training or
yeah,
an experience that's close by. If you come up on the white one, then it's dealer's choice. You never know what's going to happen. And we can't afford that if we're in certain roles. I can't afford that if the doctor's making a call on what drug or medicine to give me or what sort of intervention to give me at the emergency room. So why would I expect a difference between a copper intervening, after a traffic stop? You get it? I mean, it's that simple, folks.
well,
It really is.
and I like, I like learning the sort of the values and the written code that any organization has, right? Whatever it is,
Yep.
whether it's, say, this is our duty to intervene policy, this is our values, this is whatever it is. I love learning and reading everything that they're doing and saying, because that way, when they come down with something, that an organization will come down with something that counters what their own values are, and then you go, but wait a minute, right here, you said this. Tell
Yes.
me how this fits in, right? And you're keeping people in line, you're keeping people in check, right? You
You're
can just say, wait
holding
a minute,
them
accountable.
accountable.
Yeah, you're just saying,
Exactly.
wait a minute, you said this, but now you're doing that. Explain to me explain to me the
So
dissonance there
what's
I'm
the
seeing.
difference between your line of reasoning right now and a duty to intervene? There is
Not.
none, Brian.
That's
You're
what I'm.
holding
Yeah.
yourself and your fellows accountable. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's again, it's not, it seems more difficult than it is, because it is more complex than people give it credit for, right? That
Right.
it's not easy to do it, but it is if you know how to articulate it, right? Meaning if it could, because then it becomes clear. If I have words to
Is
describe the situation, well, now it's clear. I can see they're
you're exactly
violating
right.
this policy. This is how they're violating it. I now have to intervene and do something, right? Now, again, depending on the situation, maybe you couldn't affect the outcome, but if you stepped in and did something, one, you did the right thing, so you should be fine, right?
Exactly.
But also you, again, you made the point, you tried to hold people to the standard. They didn't want to do it, they couldn't get along for whatever reason. That, okay, got it. But now you know where you fit in an organization. Maybe
And
it's
where
time
you
to go
need to
somewhere
fix
else,
it.
or where it's
Exactly.
broken, or where to go.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? That's the whole point, is that
I
as
agree.
long and we get into that a lot with a lot of the stuff we talk about. It's a lot about articulation and understanding. That's part of sense making. Don't jump to the problem solving yet. You got to start with the sense making, right?
Amen.
What is it that I'm actually seeing here? So I know we kind of we got into a lot, and the, again, when you're talking about how, how to set up different training like this, or the values of an organization, or what duty to intervene means, it can get a little complicated. And a lot of what I've seen out there, people talking about it, it's just too general to give you any sort of value.
Yes.
Remember that taking into account all aspects of it, it's like, what the fuck does
Every
that mean?
situation may be different.
Yeah,
So it's up to you to decide how
it's
different it
like,
is.
thanks.
What?
How did this 45-minute click through video that I just did help
If
me in any way? It didn't, and someone
no,
got paid a lot of money to
a
make that,
lot
but
of money.
oh well. But these again, it takes back to what you said, but the roll call training, and it doesn't matter what it is. 5 minutes in the morning is
Yep.
all you need to flip that switch on and get people thinking in the right direction. So
Amen.
anything else to add, other than if anyone's going to be in the Topeka, Kansas area in August, beginning of August, we have a course going on, so you can
And we
reach
got a
out to us
webinar
about
coming
that.
up, buddy.
Oh
We got
yeah,
a
yeah.
webinar
This
coming up
is
in a
going to
couple of weeks.
release next Monday, so a week from this being released, we have the webinar as well. So if you're not signed up actually at the Arcadia Cognerati website, you should do that, because you can get a free webinar. We already had some people reach out and ask, like, "Hey man, I saw the webinar. How much does it cost?" I'm like, it's free. Go ahead and sign up. They're like, "Oh, sweet, I'm right on it." But we are doing one, and it specifically relates around cognitive performance, right?
Amen.
And training, and how we look at and how we define it, and the limitations and capabilities of eye and brain, that kind of fun stuff. So check that out, and then yeah, go to the Arcadia website, reach out to us, leftofgreg@gmail.com. We have a Patreon site as well, and we've got more coming. So stay tuned. We appreciate everyone for listening. Please share this with your friends. And any last final words, Greg, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, man. I think reasonableness. That's my word of the day. Make sure your
Reasonableness.
behavior is reasonable.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. It, again, according to the values of
Based
the
on a reasonable
organization,
person. Exactly.
what's reasonable for me, Greg, is
No, no,
different.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
You're unreasonable.
not your reasonableness standard. A reasonable
Yeah,
person. Don't use yourself.
exactly. Go back to the Fourth Amendment, read it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And don't forget that training changes behavior.